The out-of-control regeneration in Regenerators Explained, Resident Evil 4 Remake lore by Roanoke Gaming.
The human body is much more durable than it's generally given credit for. As we progress through life and age, we tend to look at our meat suits as slowing down and becoming more fragile, but the reality is, what it took to even get you to this point is almost beyond measure. Countless wounds healed, diseases fought, bones reinforced, muscles torn and repaired, all in the name of keeping you up and moving so that the next day, you might be able to fight off a saber-toothed cat, or at least fistfight an anglerfish down in the depths of the ocean.
Yeah.
The point is our bodies, despite
one.
becoming somewhat weaker over time, have this healing factor to thank for our ability to just completely survive. It's just sort of anecdotal, but actually I wasn't really aware of how much damage my hands would have on them before I really had a wedding ring on. I used to look at my titanium ring before it fell off somewhere in Alabama and see how tore up it was. It's actually pretty wild. But anyhow, back on track. The ability to heal from anything is based on how quickly your cells move on an injury and what sort of cell it is. A cut on the skin, mostly healed in a week. A deeper wound might take a few weeks. A bone break, about a month and a half. However, you start getting to neurological injuries, it could take years, or potentially you might never actually come back from the injury if it impacted the brain too strongly. Metabolism.
It was Roy Benavidez, right, who we were discussing in a Fat Electrician video, stepped on a landmine. Nah, this man's never gonna do anything again. Just kind of snaps to one day, and it's just what do you mean? I know I'm a Marine, but I can put the square in the square hole. What are you talking about, dude? Oh, you're never gonna walk again, dude. Actually, pulls himself just through that. Starts doing 500 push-ups a day, running miles. The human body is so interesting because you have, for every case Roy Benavidez, the legend that he is, you have people that will the fatal half inch, right? You can trip a half inch and break every bone in your body. You can fall from 2 stories and you'll walk it off. You can, smash a coffee table with your toe and break it. And part of that has to do with individuality. Part of that has to do with certain health factors and stuff like that. But the human body is so weird, especially when you consider there's been situations in which people under a certain age have had to have their brain taken out, right? Or they've had to have portions of the brain removed. And because of the age at which it was done at, instead of suffering super long-term detrimental effects, the brain actually took all of that work, and with that portion of the brain is covering pretty much everything. Man, medicine is wild.
And energy production is the basis of all healing, as without energy, a cell won't be able to enter mitosis, and thus it's not going to be able to seal up a wound, as this is the most structural component in the ability to heal.
There it is, chat. It's the powerhouse of the cell. My God.
Which rounds us nicely to today's topic. In the events of the Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 4 Remake, the Los Illuminados would rediscover a mind-controlling parasite, as well as body-controlling parasite, sealed away a long time ago, generations actually, by the ancestors of Salazar. After constructing a castle over the cave entrance to keep the parasite contained within the low-oxygen environment, the descendants would dutifully keep the parasite there until Ramon Salazar would be approached by Osmond Sadler. Well, I say approach, but in reality the weak nobility that he was would be manipulated by Sadler into sending crews down there to dig for this parasite. Upon excavating out the parasite, they would find that the Las Plagas were in fact extinct in their multicellular form due to the complete lack of oxygen within those cave systems and how long they've been down there. However, much like an endospore of bacteria, which is where a bacteria will enter what is essentially an inactive form, but is able to survive atmospheric conditions and environments it's not really suited for, so too were the Las Plagas able to achieve this form, which would then go on to infect villagers. The parasite.
I wonder if that's the same thing that happens to some of the bacterial fluid from necromorphs in Dead Space, where it goes into an inactive state. Because I guarantee you that bacterial fluid would be, I'm talking about from the infector form specifically, right? The marker doesn't have to have an infector form infect you. It just makes you, it makes the process easier in certain aspects, right? I wonder if that's something that comes into play in Dead Space.
It would continue to grow within their bodies, specifically the lung area, after being exposed to the moisture of the body as well as the oxygen that would naturally be brought in. With this breakthrough and reactivation of the parasite, Sadler was able to officially have the entire parasite within his grasp, and not just a bunch of desiccated parasite bodies. Great news, I guess, if you like parasites in your bodies. With this renewed hope, he would surgically extract these parasites to create a line utilizing the eggs and injecting them directly into a person.
People actually do that, though. There was a whole thing, was it early 2010s, the tapeworm diet, where people just, consume tapeworm to have a tapeworm? Yeah, you're losing weight because you got a stupid tapeworm. You're gonna deal with that? No? Just okay with that? I don't know, man. I don't know. I'm not quite that dedicated to losing weight, if that makes sense. It wouldn't also surprise me if there were other variations of that. No, it is no. No, I don't want it. Don't do it.
By doing so, this would create a
Consult your
Regenerador,
medical
a
provider.
human completely controlled by the parasite, willing to do only the bidding of Sadler and the dominant strain of Las Plagas. Time would pass as the experimentations would continue on people in the surrounding villages, and eventually other scientists would be brought in on this massively unethical project in an effort to control the human population. However, some of the scientists would get absolutely lost in the sauce and end up willing to become these experiments themselves.
The Regenerators are a case, or Regenerador, depending pronunciation you go with. They are an example of science for the sake of science. Science for the sake of science, historically. That's some really messed up stuff.
Out to a neighboring island, a fortress would be constructed with much more modern materials, which would be necessary for what they would be working on. The project would take a stark tonal shift from simply controlling the minds and thoughts of the average human to creating creatures that may deal with any resistance that popped up. To this end, surgical alterations took place on those already infected, or also just as likely, people who were captured and voluntold to participate in these experiments. You know, anyone who would like stray too close to the island and then just get totally got. I mean, if they had the ability to steal the president's daughter, then there's no way there weren't squads out there just not rounding up participants. Anyhow, as the test became more strange, eventually someone would have a bright idea. Like, it's really cool to just have one parasite in your body, right? But what would happen if we put several in there just randomly throughout the body? Looking at what one parasite can do concerning tissue recruitment in the gonados, and I mean, it can literally burst through the head of a person and control the body towards the enemy, that should kind of tell you what these things are capable of. But along with that, the new tissue would possess new bones and musculature formed in the direction of what the Las Plagas wanted. So it could be understood readily that the Las Plagas does in fact control cells individually and can change behavior as well as the ability of the cell itself. One such creature that would be a completely altered Homo sapiens would be not so much related to us structurally, but only in genetics and general body shape. The Regenerators were horrific beings that are all presumed extinct now after the detonation on the island after Sadler was dealt with, which definitely didn't kill me several times as I kept trying to secure all the resources in the area because my greed is greater than my fear. Finding a memo written by one of the scientists known as Luis, he would then go on to state, after working at this facility for some time, that the hideous creatures such as El Gigante and Novastadors are merely byproducts of the diabolical and inhumane experiments conducted on the specimens that were once human. But there's one type of creature that clearly distinguishes itself from the rest. These creatures are called Regenerators. Regenerators have a superior metabolism that allows them to regenerate their lost body parts at incredible speeds, which at this point I'm breaking into the literal memo to explain this metabolism and its requirements. I mean, after all, being a former scientist myself working in the lab, interrupting Lewis isn't as bad as it could be. The human metabolism, as we all know, is based on our ability to take in oxygen. Once that enters the system, the organic molecules are oxidized in a process known as aerobic respiration, and if you're doing it without oxygen, such as when you work out or run or do anything like that, it's anaerobic. This respiration is what we hear when the Regenerators are actually using their unsteady breathing. Taking a long, deep breath each time, it sounds shaky, and it's entirely possible that they would need more oxygen than normal in order to power their own metabolism, which is made mention by Luis. And they can heal from anything, which definitely supports that notion, but by that logic, it is much faster and more complete than our metabolisms. The energy requirements would be immense, but along with that, so too are the oxygen requirements, and those are just going to be higher by compulsion. But all right, let's get back to Luis for a second. He goes on to say, I've never seen anything like it. It is this characteristic that makes them almost invincible to conventional weapons.
Actually, wasn't original RE4, weren't they really susceptible to incendiary grenades, which were notably absent from the Resident Evil 4 remake? I remember there was a couple instances where I was trying to I think it's speedrunning it on stream. Not like speedrunning, but like just running through it, trying to see how fast I could do it. And man, incendiary grenades go hard on these guys in the original.
But like any living creature, there's a way to kill it. Apparently there are plagas that can live in its body somewhat like leeches. They can't be seen with the naked eye, they can only be located with thermal imaging. And to stop its regeneration process, these leech-like plagas must be located and then destroyed. As far as I know, most of the Regenerators host a number of these leech-like plagas, and to kill the Regenerators, each one of these leeches needs to be killed.
So I want to point out that we're using the biosensor scope, but it it wasn't it thermal in the original? I can't remember. What I'm trying to get across is that when you look at a Regenerator, right? When you look at it and you can see the individual plaga inside of it, you see the plaga as heat signatures. You don't, when you look at other enemies, right, and you see all of them lit up as if, it's the, a thermal sight, right? So that tells me either we have a special biosensor scope that uses like thermal but slightly to the left. In that way, like the Regenerator has a average body temperature, but it's accounting for the plaga being potentially hotter, right? Or the Regenerator is actually running cold. And that's what interests me.
There are two forms of Regenerators that we know of. The first version is much smoother and less spiky. This form of creature appears to be more typical and likely took place as an earlier form in the experiment. Later though, through more experimentation, with the capabilities of the parasite and the human body's ability to heal with the presence of the parasite, a creature would be born for the project known as the Iron Maiden. This form would show a continuation of the melding of the body and the parasite, which would have some pretty profound impacts on the differentiation of cells and how the body would go about its standard functioning, which would allow for this creature to pull off what it could. But to understand internally what is going on with the standard Regenerator and subsequently the Iron Maiden, we must first take a look at its physical morphology and movement to begin to explain what we will see concerning its internal anatomy later. Starting with the feet, we see they are still somewhat there in their standard plantigrade structuring. I mean, after all, it does hail from Homo sapiens. However, the first changes are beginning to show. The balls of the feet, the arch, and the heel are all there. However, the toes would jut out further, indicating there is likely a lot of bone growth in the area, or something in general is stretching this out. We will see more of this in a moment, but it should be noted the bone growth may have initially happened, and it would not appear to be the basis for why this creature is longer though. Moving up to the legs, we begin to see some internal structures causing deformities in how they look. The skin on the heels almost bunches up like it's wearing pants. Kind of reminds me of the Paleheads from Resident Evil 2, I believe. A little bit. But it most definitely is skin. Or are the Paleheads from Resident Evil 3? I honestly cannot remember. Somebody mentioned that in the comments.
I think they're from 3, yeah. Editor's right.
No, it's definitely Resident Evil 2. So as we move up, we can see below the knees, the leg will typically jut out to the side, showing that if there is bone there, it's either broken or not present at all. As we move up the thighs, the extra skin continues to be present all over, but as we move to the pelvic region, we see no indicator as to what this creature was as far as being male or female in its human life. Whether by body growing or surgical intervention, it is unknown why this is the case. The size of this creature seems to collect around the abdominal region. This may be for a multitude of reasons. The first reason may be as simple as the person may have had a lot of adipose tissue at the time that they were experimented on and infected with the multiple plagas. This tissue would be assimilated and changed like all the other tissue of the body, although I believe there is one major change to the internal anatomy based on what we see, but I don't think it's really been suggested yet, but we'll get there momentarily. Moving up to the thoracic region, we can see that the fat on the chest may indicate something about the sex of the creature prior. I mean, it is possible again that it's just a larger male, but the fat deposits on the chest would suggest potentially this was a female present in the mix of Regenerators. I mean, honestly, they didn't really care who was infected, so it's even mentioned by Leon in the game. There's no...
Technically, this is not in the remake. This specific thing is at the intro of Resident Evil 4 Original. Like, that's a really nitpicky, pedantic thing for me to say. Don't get me wrong. But we are comparing... We're pulling from both at this point. We're going from new to old.
Sex discrimination here, but as we move up to the neck, it is rather sinewy and elongated. It can be assumed, much like the other areas, that they seem to have increased in length, such like the feet, and really the neck has done the same. We see the greatest example of this growth pattern when moving down to the arms and hands, however. The upper arms are not too much longer than your average person, terminating around mid-thoracic region if the creature's arms were next to its side. But as we move to the forearms, we begin to see some major growth patterns taking place. The forearms are about double the length of the average person's, and with that they are covered in some extra skin that is also seen on the legs. And for the arms, this is actually more necessary than on the legs, it would appear. As we move down to the hands, they are still there roughly in their human form with 4 fingers and 1 thumb per hand, but the fingers themselves are much longer, being able to wrap around Leon's head quite easily, or really any humans that get close by.
It almost feels like there's bone. There has to be bone structures in there. Like, I'm trying to think, because the only other thing I could think about is that the plaga itself are acting like bone structures. So there might be broken bone in there. Bone could be removed. I feel like there's got to be bone in there. But the way that it stretches out its hands and the way that it can do some of that, I almost wonder if the Plaga are kind of acting like a skeletal structure, like their tendrils and stuff, which makes it so that their arms can, just accordion out at you and grab you and pull you in, right? Or maybe that like the bone structure's there, but it's supplemented by tendrils between the bones, kind of like what's a good thing I'm trying to look for? Like if you have a rubber band and you have beads around the rubber band, right? Like arts and crafts status, and you pull apart how the beads, like you're gonna see the beads kind of stay where they're at, right? But then you see the rubber band underneath, or what the thing underneath, how it just starts to elongate because it's stretching, kind of like that. It is the worst possible way I could use to describe it, but that's the best that I can offhand do to get what I'm trying to get across.
They could most definitely palm a basketball, and there are claw-like fingernails, but these are just your typical growth of fingernails over an extended period of time. It does not appear that these fingernails could be used for much aside from their normal functionality. Moving up to the head, that's where the real nightmare fuel is. The mouth can completely split open from ear to ear as the mandible has become modified to the point that it can fit almost an entire human head if it so desired. Within that head sit bony protrusions that are no longer considered teeth. They are formed through an entirely different process, which will definitely, we will see evidence of this with the Iron Maiden. So you don't have to keep it original with you as well. Going up to their head, or at least the top of their head, there is no head on hair, and the ears are completely gone. The Regenerator stands about an entire head and shoulders taller than Leon, who is canonically 5'11", but there are arguments based on him compared to the Ganados that he is really 5'9", but it's just more likely the Ganados are all experiencing increased growth, which appears to be what the Lost Plagas does. Either way,
I always understood that the Garador were always artificially grown. I was under the impression that they all had that growth from the parasite. I didn't actually know this was an argument.
Canonically, he's 5'11", or about 2.36 bald eagles. And in heathen units, he's 180.3 centimeters. Being an entire head and shoulders taller, that would easily put the Regenerator at a height of around 6'8" to 6'10", or 203 to around 208 centimeters tall. This creature is absolutely massive, and given its overall appearance and breathing, it is still horrifying in the games and in real life, and you would definitely crap your pants. The eyes emit a yellow-orange bioluminescence glow, much like the other Ganados at night, however their composition is completely different.
Right.
One of the things...
See, when we look at this, right, when we look at it through the biosensor, like we see that, okay, so it's not that it's running cold, because everything around it's running cold. Everything around it's cold, right? It is emitting heat. The heat is, however, centralized around the Plaga and all the tendrils, with the maximum heat being the Plaga itself. I'd have to see a comparison and contrast how the biosensor picks up other enemies in the game. I think all other enemies pick up like a brighter orange than the Regenerator currently is. I would have to double check that, which makes me wonder what this thing's body temperature is like. And when it heals, that is an immense amount of heat that is going off. So I wonder if that's a kind of game balancing thing to kind of not muddle up the interface, right? Like not to draw your attention to specifically the Plaga versus drawing your attention to say, hey, for scientific reasons, that limb, that left arm right there healing, that is going to be generating a lot of heat. So I think that might be a game-ism rather than a science-ism. You could argue potentially because the facility is cold, maybe the Regenerator as a whole is running colder, but right here, because we can see its arm currently healing, that regeneration process is going to be hot, right? Divisions of cells, cellular mitosis, meiosis, right, generates heat. This would probably generate enough heat to cook its arm, I would guess, right? So I think that is a UI-ism.
One of the things that we see when discussing the Regenerators is their movement and how they're able to stretch Armstrong their arms. Their arms do stretch out forever. This creature, when laying on the ground, will stand in a way also that seems to suggest there is no skeleton. In fact, the lore also states there's a possibility it possesses no osseous structuring internally, but I actually have to disagree with that for a few reasons. When the creature stands, if it is made out of just pure muscle with all skeleton broken down, then it would not be able to resist Earth's gravity.
Yeah.
Along with that, the structure of the skull would not continue to take on the shape that it has, and the overall structure of the body would be more like a blob on the ground than a humanoid with muscle that it uses to stand. It would fundamentally not be able to pull against anything to move the body. So what is going on here? To understand this, we need to take a look at the parasite. The Las Plagas will fundamentally change how a cell operates down to a genetic level. A nice place to start would be the metabolism itself. When you damage the Regenerator, as the name implies, it regenerates. This regeneration is integral to its lethality and survivability, but it is not invincible. It's clear the metabolism would be increased just across the board within the body at the direction of the Las Plagas, and as a result, mitosis concerning genes cyclin A, cyclin B, and B2, as well as CDC2 and CDK1, amongst several other genes, would be activated in the presence of danger. The nice thing about the parasite, I suppose you could call it that anyhow, is that the body does not have to call out to the rest of the body for instructions on response to damage. When the Las Plagas detects damage, which is almost immediately, as it's another organism, it will force the cells.
Bold man to fight multiple of them at the same time. He didn't pick and choose his shots. Bold of Roanoke to just go in there, guns ablazing, fighting multiple Regenerators. I gotta hand it to him.
To undergo rapid mitosis, sealing the wound. But it's not only just that, it can also regrow limbs as well, which may sound odd, right?
Grenades,
like,
that
how's
makes
that possible? So you need to understand that within our bodies on a genetic level, all the information to regrow limbs isn't just lost after gestation.
No, it's just inactive.
Genes are turned off after the completion of your body's structure, and it's still present in some animals, such as lizards who can
Starfish.
regrow their tails, and it may be completely possible that in the future humanity unlocks these specific sequences, and by our direction, we're able to regrow limbs in a person before switching off those genes again at the completion of their tasks, so as not to start growing more limbs. But it's
Wasn't that the entire plotline of the original Hulk before MCU? Like OG, like what was it, 2005 Hulk? Wasn't that the whole plot point of it? Of like they use starfish to reactivate those genes in the Hulk. I think, dude, it's been so goddamn long. I haven't even seen the entire MCU. Okay, thank you for corroborating that, chat. I don't know. So I have to look at the biosensor. That's the one that interests me because I was incorrect on the prior thing. It wasn't that it was regenerating, it was a shot. But I don't remember ever seeing a heat signature when a Regenerator or an Iron Maiden regenerates. I don't remember seeing one. I don't remember seeing a flare in heat signatures. And then the argument comes up, it could be fine-tuned to the parasites, and the parasite and the Las Plagas. I don't know about that specifically. That would make sense. This is, don't get me wrong, this is an incredibly pedantic, like, nobody else cares about this. Nobody else notices this detail. But it's one of those that kind of breaks my immersion a little bit.
clear the Las Plagas maintains this ability due to the genetic interference it seems to impose on the host. So you may be asking yourself why this is the case, but it really is as simple as a Las Plagas possesses the T-virus, which most definitely is a gene manipulator, and as such, by containing this virus, it is able to have a link to the human genome, using the T-virus as a bridge to impose the control. Internally, we can definitely see how this control is exercised over the host's body. When taking a look through the thermal scope, it's important to remember that this is not an X-ray scope. This is simply looking for heat signatures.
Right.
We can see all the standard components of the infection that the Las Plagas have, which they've attached themselves to a fairly extensive network of arteries and veins in order to remain supplied with oxygen and nutrients. We also see the wrench that we all possess within our own bodies, but concerning other structures such as bones, what's the deal? Again, it is noted there is a possibility there is no internal skeleton, but again, me being me, I have to disagree. I believe it is still there. However, it's just been changed extensively. And by extensively, I mean largely it's kind of just fractured and separated from one another in comparison to how it used to be, but there are missing sections. So let me explain that real quick. It seems to me that when the Las Plagas took over the body, or the several Las Plagas, there were specific changes to make it more viable, and it may be that with one Las Plagas, some tissues will change, but with multiple in the body, the effect becomes amplified, changing all the cells. In terms of the skeleton, I believe most of it was attacked, but not entirely destroyed. Osteoclast function would have been changed and kicked into overdrive, dissolving a lot of bone, and as a result, this calcium would collect in the body. Differentiation between cells appears to have been largely lost, changing the creature into a more cancerous blob. But this collection of minerals released from the bone is the most important aspect, I believe. While large areas of bone were lost, I still believe there is some bone still present within the body. The distances between them are just greater. Take a femur, for instance. Instead of it being one singular long bone, I believe large sections of it were dissolved and connective tissue bridged the gap instead, like a ligament connecting bone to bone.
Connective tissue, right? Like the Las Plagas tendrils, like I was talking about. I don't have any evidence of that, but it would make sense, right? Especially because we know that it has enough power to, I don't know, spout from their head and have a just shard of bone that it uses to whip around, right? Like these connective structures, connective to even then on expired Ganados in the remake, right? How you see little tendrils from where their limbs used to be, right? Like that would make the most sense. So you at that point retain the rigidity of it, but you kind of go with that weird rubber band, hair tie, and like little bead arts and crafts example I went with, where you have connective tissue between these things. That way it can adjust to a situation, lengthen its arms, still have that support and just not be a blob on the ground. Dark Souls 3 blob status, right?
That gap. In the lower legs, such as the shin, we can actually see that the more straight portions would be bone, and where it bends is the presence of this hypothesized ligament in this area,
which would make
being
sense,
exposed to the pressure caused by the weight of the creature, causing it to bend outwards. The bone that was left over can also be seen in areas like the toes or fingers, showing it is not completely lost. Also, the skull is the largest indicator in my mind that there is most definitely still bone in the body, and this would also explain how the creature is able to stand up at all. Again, only muscle, tendons, and ligaments are not going to allow this creature to contract muscle to stand. It requires a rigid structure somewhere where it stands, and this is still like going to be some of the vertebrae present in this creature, but the distances between the vertebrae has been increased. And this allows
I think that the mass is just too large for it to just be Las Plagas tendrils. There, what was it? Resident Evil, was it 2 or 3? Where the T-virus plant, it had to have been 2, right? The T-virus plant infected a bunch of people in one of the areas, and so these people were like half plant hybrids. But the reason that they kind of worked, from my understanding, is that like a lot of their biomass was kind of replaced with plant, right? Does that make sense? The mass on this doesn't make sense that a standalone plaga or group of plaga could support this with just connective tissue and little tendrils, right? It just doesn't make sense. If this thing had less mass, okay, maybe we can talk about it. I mean, you think about that, and you think about even if that's all fat. Like, let's just hypothetically say that's all fat, right? Because muscle is heavier than fat, right? 250 fat versus 250 muscular, it looks different, right? I don't see it. I don't see the mass supporting it, especially with the way that it stands.
Allows it to fold over itself as the bones are not touching or getting in the way of one another. This gives the Regenerator the appearance that it has no bones, but really there are clearly dissolved bones that were once in critical areas but have been replaced by tissue, and still you have a foundation.
Yeah.
And this is also seen in the arms themselves. The ligaments in the arms would most definitely be coiled to a degree, as the ligaments tear past 6% stretched of their original size. But with the bones still being a broken mass and coming together, they can provide support in the arms, and this not only shows like why the arms can get longer, but how they're able to stretch and grab someone further away. But you might also be asking now, okay, so if the bones are based on being like fractured masses or smaller masses inside with connective tissue in between them, how do we even know if the bones were dissolved at all? And to that, we look towards the Iron Maiden, but also the very teeth of the standard Regenerator. The teeth of the Regenerator, they're not teeth, but sharp bone. They almost appear like fractured bones as well. Presumably, they would be growing off of the mandible, and this would require calcium. With the Iron Maiden,
aren't teeth by definition bone though? Like I get what was being said, but teeth are bone, right? I'm not incorrect in that statement.
This growth is more noticeable, and the Las Plagas have dissolved bone, and as a result, the calcium within the body would begin growing these conical-shaped spikes in the body by using osteoblasts to form them. From here, the muscle spears outwards to penetrate anybody that gets close to the actual creature itself. So I believe the creation of the Iron Maiden would most definitely show the reallocation of calcium resources taken from other pieces of bone. This creature still must stand, however, and the downward force of gravity would be constant, and this would require at least something to provide structural support to the body, though it's probably just the bare minimum at this point. So I briefly mentioned earlier, though, about cells having become non-differentiated. Much like how the bone would be dissolved for its mineral, many cells were altered in their functionality. It's important to remember that all
teeth are closer to hair. Does that mean teeth are keratin? Because I assumed that they were calcium, right? Like hair and fingernails are keratin, but teeth are calcium. I thought. Right? Maybe that makes sense. I might actually be off base here.
Cells contain the same genetic coding. Your skin cells could have become nerve cells, which could have become muscle cells, but it's all based on differentiation as to why they become what they are.
Okay.
It would appear to me that the infection by the Las Plagas actually just changes the cell, causing it instead to really no longer be differentiated, but just kind of take on a more standardized kind of functionality. The nervous system is gone. The original musculature is gone. Most of the bones are gone. A person is reformed from the ground up, taking them back to factory settings on their cells, and then rebuilt by the Las Plagas to become what they are, which kind of accounts for like the cancerous-like appearance on the skin. This is what the internal structures look like as well. And this is why they still have a somewhat human shape, but they are still very much so not human in terms of what they used to be. They still will, however, have the same genetic markers. The Iron Maiden, however, is mildly different. When taking off a limb of like a Regenerator, the tendrils will naturally run all over the body post-infection. They will exit out of this new limb hole, and they will form scaffolding to regrow the limb and quickly heal itself. However, usually if the top portion of the body is destroyed, this will be too much for one Las Plagas to heal, which will then result in a runaway effect as the metabolism is no longer controlled, resulting in a creature to build up too much heat too quickly and then explode. The Iron Maiden, however, appears to have just been infected, possibly for longer or possibly with more Las Plagas, and has become more familiar with the body simply because it has more control over the body as it's more deeply ingrained.
I could actually argue more Plaga, because we do see, it's the weird merchant thing, right? There's a weird merchant hunt, like, oh, this is the hidden boss of this area kind of thing, right? And you actually run into it in separate ways, the DLC, where there's a Iron Maiden with like, what is it, like 10 Plaga in it? This thing just is, you look at it and you're like, dear God, that's a lot of Plaga. So it could be. It could be a number of factors. I understood it was maturity, and it could potentially be augmented by the number of Plaga present as well.
Top half of the body destroyed, the Las Plagas will use the runaway effect of the metabolism, at least the singular one, to let the healing factor take place much faster, which seems like a bit of a gamble, as I still think they could explode, but this will cause the bones to grow rapidly and then allow itself to sort of reconnect, causing spikes to protrude out of the body everywhere. This could be compared to like kind of a terminology of like holding on to the tail of a comet. Basically, it's completely almost uncontrollable, and you're just kind of along for the ride and just see what happens. The Plagas barely has control over the body's natural functions at this point, as those that were helping to control it, considering there were multiple Las Plagas at the helm originally helping, and this would be quite difficult for it to achieve to keep the body from self-destructing.
So like, let's go back to that. This is exactly the one I'm talking about.
Originally helping.
Look at how many Plaga there are in comparison to what the usual 4, maybe the 5th that appears in the head when the Regenerator turns into the Iron Maiden, right? And there's one you run into in separate ways too that is similar to this. This is specifically the merchant one for the merchant mission. If you're missing this, this is where you go. You go back to this little room with the wrench, right? And you find it here. Like, it seems like more Plaga could give it more finesse and more control, is how I look at that. But yeah, this is what I was talking about.
And this would be quite difficult for it to achieve to keep the body from self-destructing. But now we come to my favorite part, how the Regenerator uses its newly recruited muscle and bone to keep itself from taking a dirt nap. For your standard Regenerator, when they get a hold of you, the bone growth from the mandible and maxilla of the skull will be used to bite into Leon's carotid and jugular. Biting twice, they are easily sliced open, leading to a bleed out in mere seconds. Other damage to the body, such as to the esophagus and trachea, are also assured, with those being severed. It is also not known if the spinal cord damage has kind of gotten to the point where the body would be in real trouble, but considering when Leon is on the ground and his arms immediately fall to his side after taking a deep bite, I am fairly certain the spinal cord would be severed at this point, leaving him paralyzed, bleeding out. When the Iron Maiden comes around, it's a little more brutal. Having runaway bone growth all over the body as a response to the rapidly approaching end, a singular Plagas left just barely able to control the metabolic effect is able to regrow itself. Because it is just one giant spiked monster, any strike such as down onto the shoulders of Leon will cause the spikes to enter the thoracic cavity, breaking ribs, spearing the lungs, and potentially even spearing the heart and aorta as well as the spinal cord, which is based all on chance. Slapping Leon to the ground, this will cause him to lay there, internally bleeding out as it goes for his abdominal region with the spikes, completely turning him into mincemeat. However, Leon is a trained professional, and professionals have standards. Standards like not dying. By using the thermal scope, he can easily, well, I mean, it should be easy for you, I mean, it's easy for me, pick out the lost Plagas and put a round into each one. Once this happens, the control of the body is completely lost, and it appears that the lost Plagas actually ramp up the baseline metabolism naturally, as in once it's ramped up, it just stays at that level, and then they control it with hormones. In the event of damage, these hormones simply cease and the body heals quickly. This control loop allows for the lost Plagas to actively keep in control everything as far as functionality of the body. But after they are destroyed, nothing is stopping the body from rapidly entering a mitotic state, and with the metabolism turned up as high as it is, this causes the body to enter in unsustainable growth, but also produces a lot of heat. As it does, this causes the body to literally explode due to its own inability to downshift the metabolic speed, leading to the creature's end.
Okay, makes sense.
But anyhow, what thank you guys for watching. If you enjoy, then leaving a like would be very great of you, as it gets the video out into the algorithm, and subscribing is a great way to stay up to date on when I post. Also, I'm bringing back merch just to let you know, with someone that actually makes good shirts. I'll have that link down in the description if you want to check that out. We will be basically taking away the Halloween ones here soon, and then bringing in Christmas themed ones, so keep an eye out for that. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and Roanoke Tales channel link, where last week we talked about how this man swore that he saw a alien spacecraft above his plane as he was flying his Cessna. However, he was never heard from again, and his last words were, "It's definitely not an aircraft."
Nice.
But also, speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, huge thank you to our astrophysicist, Desk Dancer. Thank you, sir, as well as our scientist, Chad the Enjoyer of Explanations of B-Grade Horror Movies, Florian, Lacune, Lucian Dragon, Octavia, Serpentia, and the last final girl on the left. And to the rest of my patrons, I thank you guys as well. Your help goes a long way towards keeping the channel running and is greatly appreciated. But all right, that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I'll see y'all in the next one.
So, relevant context here, and thank you for this chat. Teeth are similar to bone in that they use calcium in their structure, but it is different with stuff like enamel, dentin, and cementum. Sorry, I was unfamiliar with that word. Enamel is the outer layer, dentin is the inner layer, and cementum keeps the tooth anchored. Cool, so thank you for that. I actually had it wrong, and that's why I like watching content like this. I get to learn new things. I get to see cool things and learn from them, and be able to put two and two together and be able to just like understand the world better. So Regenerate with Plaga, controlled overclocking, Regenerate with no Plaga, red hot meat mine, pretty much. Excellent video by Roanoke Gaming. One of the most creepy creatures in Resident Evil as a franchise, really. A lot of people remember the ragged breathing from original Resident Evil. I know I sure do. Kind of lives rent free in my head. You know, the moment I heard that in the remake, I'm like, dear God, they brought him back. And you know, it was fun. It's a good game. If you haven't played Resident Evil 4, that is an excellent place to start the franchise. I know some people, you know, hey, how do you start? I started with 4, went to 5. You know, I mean, it's not really a wrong way to do it. I probably wouldn't start with 5 or 6 personally, but that's up to you. Thank you, Roanoke Gaming, for an excellent video. Definitely, if you have not, go ahead and check out Roanoke Gaming. They put out awesome content. A lot of stuff that, you know, like movies and stuff like that, as you can see. Funny space lizard radiation towards the end of that, but, you know, I much prefer sticking with Dead Space and Resident Evil, and for that, I absolutely love Roanoke as a channel. Definitely go check them out. Let me know what you thought in the comment section down below. See you in the next one.